Got it.
Okay. All right. I want to just introduce our two speakers. Dr. Dan Morhaim is an emergency room physician and was a delegate in Maryland for 24 years, more than any other physician in the Maryland Assembly. And when I first met Dr. Dan decades ago, he was already an advocate for peace. We're just so lucky to have him on our board at Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility. Darrell Carrington is a lobbyist for 16 years, half of which he's been our lobbyist. And at Chesapeake PSR, he especially enjoys lobbying for peace and justice. So we love working with Darrell. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Dan Morhaim.
Thank you, Gwen. Thank you, everybody, for coming out. This is going to be a discussion about how to be an effective citizen lobbyist, an insider's perspective. I served in the Maryland General Assembly for 24 years. My life was 3 months a year in the General Assembly and 9 months a year being an ER doctor, doing day shifts, night shifts, weekends, and holidays, which informed a lot of my politics. This will apply to whatever your issue is. It could be a traffic stop sign in your neighborhood, or it could be police issues, voting rights, reproductive rights, whatever. And so I'm going to walk through some slides. So let me move to share screen and make sure we get that right. And there we go. So this is my background. I worked on a lot of issues, not just healthcare issues. You can't be a one-trick pony. If you want to stay elected, you got to do a lot of things. And also have written a couple of books, and I would ask you to take a look at Preparing for a Better End, which is about how to better manage advanced illness and end-of-life care. Great endorsements from my books. There's the second one, Maya Angelou, Ben Cardin, Leanna Wen, many other people. And there's the book information, and there's the cover. So that's something we're all going to face, mortality, and this is how we can be empowered to deal with it better. But I'm not going to read all the slides because I think this is a literate audience. So these are the topics that I will cover. And I want to emphasize at the beginning, elections. If you're already a famous person like an Arnold Schwarzenegger, or you come from a political family, or you're a movie star, famous athlete, you can jump ahead. But most of the rest of us start at the bottom. In fact, of the Maryland delegation, most started in local government or in the state legislature. And so I found it, I had no intention of really getting deeply involved in politics, although I always voted and paid attention. But we didn't have recycling in Baltimore City and Baltimore County back in the late 1980s. And I started going to some community meetings. And when my then county councilman would give his talk, I'd raise my hand and say, what about recycling? Why don't we have recycling in the city and the county? And he noted that. And then a month or two would roll by and there'd be another community meeting, and there I would be again. And so one day he called me up and said, okay, smart ass, in effect, I'm going to point you to the task force on recycling since you're so interested. That task force was formed. I served on it, and we did start the program and design the program that has been operative ever since in Baltimore City and Baltimore County. Well, that county councilman, of course, he and I became good friends. He went on to become county executive, and now he's a congressman, Dutch Ruppersberger. So relationships are a very important fact, but the first thing you have to do is to get elected. So let's forget the federal government for a moment. I know that it's all over the headlines, but state legislatures control a lot of things. And a lot of what we're reading in the newspapers about, in the media, about reproductive rights, about voting in elections, about vaccination policy is all started at state legislatures. And so they're often overlooked and underappreciated. And when people vote, they usually know who to vote for president or maybe governor, US senator, but when they get down further down ballot, it gets a little murky. So this is just a list of the issues that state legislatures deal with, that I dealt with, and everything else that the federal government does not, which is a lot. So here's your first challenge question. I bet most of you can name the governor, Larry Hogan. Most of you can name the state attorney general, excellent attorney general, Brian Frosh. Now, can you name your state senator? And can you name your state delegate? I put representative or assembly person because those folks are known by those titles in different states. So it's But here in Maryland, it's House of Delegates. So I was elected to the House of Delegates in 1994. My first term was in 1995. And in 2018, my wife and I decided 24 years was enough, and it was. But each legislature is different. And it's interesting how they do differ from each other. So some are full-time, but most are part-time, and they usually meet in the winter. Why is that? Because it was white landowning males who could serve in politics when the country was founded. And so in the winter, the fields were fallow. In the spring, they were planting. In summer, they were hoeing. In fall, they were harvesting. So that's why the Maryland General Assembly meets in the winter months, starts in January, runs through April, and that's pretty typical. But the district size, varies greatly from state to state. Just look at California. Senate district is 1 million people. That's more than a state senator in California represents more people than U.S. senators represent in some states. And the New Hampshire House, lower house, has 400 members. They represent about 2,500 people each. If you live long enough in New Hampshire and you haven't committed any major crimes, you have a pretty good chance of getting elected to the New Hampshire House. So it's important that you understand the structure. And Maryland is unique. We have 1 state senator and 3 at-large delegates per district. Most states have the upper house. States have the lower house often is smaller districts or runs more frequently, but here we all run on the same cycle. There are a few single member districts. That is, a state senator, state legislative district has 1 delegate in 1 district and 2 delegates in another, but overwhelmingly the 47 legislative districts in Maryland, most are 1 state senator and 3 at-large delegates, which tends to make the delegates a little more co-equal with the senators because we run the same 4-year cycle and we have the same exact population and district size. So let's just look at how elections work. Now, I know many people who want to be, advocates, they want to come down, and I was one of those people who just want to offer their ideas. But I want to take a few minutes to explain how elections work, because I want you to be thinking about this as the basis of your letter or message when you start dealing with state legislators, because you have to understand most of us start at this level. And think of Barbara Mikulski, who started, her political career began, she ends up being the longest serving woman in the history of the United States Senate, elected in her own right. But her career began when they were going to put a freeway through Fells Point and through her neighborhood, and she blocked it, went on to the city council, then became a congressperson, then U.S. senator. But let's look at our district. So our state, we have 47 legislative districts, each with about 140,000 people. And the districts are drawn, and we're going to go through a redistricting process very soon in the Maryland legislature is going to be doing that both for congressional districts and for the state districts. But the districts are drawn pretty much in such a way that votes are kind of concentrated. So if you're a Democrat in Baltimore City, Montgomery County, and Prince George's County, they're 100% represented by Democratic legislators. That's one kind of district. Another is ones that are all Republican. My district, Baltimore County, was more of a purple district. So in my district, although Democrats were getting elected down ballot, when I ran the first time, Ellen Sauerbrey won the district, Bob Ehrlich won the district, and when I ran the last time, Larry Hogan won the district. So there's different districts, but most of them are pretty much one way or the other at the primary election. And so I want to emphasize the importance of primary elections, because in most districts, winning the primary election is pretty much like winning the general. If you win a primary election in Baltimore City, you can go on a round the world cruise and go with your Republican friend from Western Maryland, and you're going to win the general election. So most people are often not voting in primary elections. So what is the turnout in the primary elections? You can read the slides here for yourself, but it's pretty low, 10, 15, 20%. So let's look at how a race actually works. There's 70,000 registered voters in the district. I'm a Democrat, and so I'm looking at the pool of potential Democrats. The turnout is here pretty generous, 25 to 40%, but often it's less than that, 10, 15%. And also when it gets down ballot where the delegate race is, people sort of don't know who those candidates are, along with judges or clerk of the court. And so what do? Well, they sort of know senator or president or whatever, governor at the top. But when they get further down, those names start to get a little murky. And so what most people do, either they don't vote in that race, or they pick some superficial characteristic based on the person's name. Like, that sounds like a woman's name. I want a woman to be, so I'll vote for that. But there are men's names who are like women's names. Maybe it sounds like a black name. You want a black person, or Jewish or Irish or whatever. They may or may not agree with any of your positions, but that's what we often do when we get down ballot. So I'm targeting the 10,000 to 15,000, 16,000 Dems that are going to vote in a primary election. And there's a subgroup that we all know about. Every candidate knows this, the prime voters. Now I can look up whether Darrell Carrington, who's going to be speaking after me, voted in the last primary election. Obviously, I don't know how he voted, but I know that he shows up. If he showed up the last 2 or 3 primary elections, he would be very likely to show up in this primary election as well, even if there's no competitive races or not very exciting. And that boils down to about 5 or 10,000 people. So what does it take to win a primary election? Most races in the House of Delegates are won with 5,000 votes, some with less. And so that subgroup, the people who go who vote every primary election, that's the prime voters. Those are the ones we target. And if you look around the United States, actually, there are people winning races to the state legislature with 2,000 votes, 3,000 votes, not huge numbers. And they're the people we target. So I went door to door my first campaign a lot. Let me define a lot. I went 8 to 9 months, 4 to 5 nights a week, 4 to 5 hours a night, 99.9% of the time by myself, festooned with campaign material. I had 2 lucky breaks when I ran the first time, and every candidate kind of has to figure out who they are. Here are my lucky breaks back in 1994. One was that the show ER was a huge hit at the time, and George Clooney was a star. So I would knock on people's doors and say, "Hi, I'm Dr. Dan Morhaim. I'm an ER doctor. Just think of me as George Clooney making a house call for your vote." I mean, you're right there at their front door. And the other thing that was lucky for me is my first name, as it turns out, Dr. Dan. You know, people, it's alliterative, and there's that book, Dr. Dan, the Bandage Man. And so I got to be known as Dr. Dan, and that helped me. But every candidate has to figure out who they are. I also, by the way, was a mailman for 2 years between college and medical school in San Francisco. So I was pretty good at walking streets and finding addresses. But it would be like this. I would go out at 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and I get to Maple Drive, let's say, and I have my list of prime voters: 101 Maple Drive, 113 Maple Drive, 121 Maple Drive, 135 Maple Drive. And then I cross the other side of the street and come down the other side, hitting the doors of Democratic voters who vote. If there are other people out there, I would always talk to them, but that's who the prime voters are. They get the phone calls, they get the door knocks, they get the direct mail, and later they get the callbacks. So let me assure you that every state legislator has a pretty good sense of who voters are. And that clues you to the first part of your messaging and letter. I'm a voter in your district. If you're of their party, that's even better because of the impact of primary elections. And I talk to 5 or 10 friends and neighbors and all the social interactions that I have. That's already sending me a signal, and you can do this more tactfully than I'm describing, that says, wow, this person's maybe connected to 10, 20, 30 people. That's a significant number of folks. If I can do okay with them, they're likely to vote for me in this election or the next election. So you got to find that 5,000 or 4,000 or 3,000 or 2,000. And if you look at Maryland primary election results in district, you'll see people winning elections with numbers like that. So it starts with this huge number, boils down to a small number. Now, we all should be quite aware at this point that every vote counts. And it really does down at this level. And we know who those people are, and we look it up. So campaigning is tough. You have to ask everybody for money. That's not easy unless you happen to be, super wealthy or super famous. But for the rest of us, it's you got to go out and ask for money, and it's not easy to do. I had to do that. But at our level, state legislative level, it's not like we're raising $100 to $200 or $500,000 and buying TV time. We're raising $50, $75, $100, $125,000. That means you have to have 100 people to give you $1,000 or 1,000 people to give you $100 or some variations to get you 100,000 for that. But anyway, people can help. And so even folks who gave me $10 or $20, I appreciated it because that was a measurable percentage. And folks that didn't have money helped in other ways, lawn signs, bumper stickers, whatever. Let me tell you an anecdote about the first coffee I had. I was there were 9 people running. There were 2 incumbents in my race for House of Delegates, 3 seats open. These people offered a coffee for me. I was so excited. They sent out several hundred postcards and invited folks. And finally, the big night came. I went there. They were there, the couple that was hosting. My wife, Shelley, came with me. There was one other person who showed up, and I thought, there's no way I'm going to win this election. Only 5 or 6 people are here. But I kept running into people over the next few weeks who said, well, I couldn't get to the coffee, but since Don and Tammy were for you, I'm for you. And I realized that while I was thinking about the campaign all the time, most people were not thinking about my campaign at all. But once they knew that I was okay or somebody they liked me, then they kind of checked the box in their head. And the other thing is communicate on issues. And Darrell and I will get into that. But understand the election process. If you participate a little bit, it goes a long way. And I always appreciate the folks who helped me out, especially before I was an incumbent. It gets a little easier because they were there at the beginning when you're an unknown candidate and facing these tough races. That doesn't mean I'm going to do what you want. That doesn't mean you own me. But certainly I'm going to be listening and attentive to the folks who helped me get into office. And that's just the reality of how we all work. We pay attention to the people that we're connected with. So first thing is, when you start your communication process, you got to understand the Maryland General Assembly website. That's how we legislators keep track of everything. And read your legislator's bio. Make a personal connection if you can. Oh, you coach soccer? I coach soccer. By the way, I'm here to talk about something else. Or you went to Towson University? I went to Towson University. Or my child went to Towson University. Whatever it is. So how you communicate. I would come home during the legislative session. I'd have a stack of stuff to read. It was a lot of things to learn. And so the folks who were nice, who helped me understand things over time, were really helpful. And I'm a reasonably smart guy and a good study, but there were a lot of issues I didn't understand, and I'll tell you some stories of that. Personal handwritten letters, actually, when I first got elected, computers weren't around. And then I remember everybody would handwrite me, I'd handwrite back. And faxes came in. Oh, that was so exciting. A fax would come, I tear it off. My one staff person, we don't have huge staff. My one staff person would bring me the fax, but that got tiresome. Then emails came. Well, that was a step forward, but now we know where all that is. So it's almost really gone full circle. So email blasts are helpful. All those things are helpful, but a personal letter is really useful. And we like praise like everybody else, even if it's not your main issue. Obviously, when you run for office or you get elected, you got a target on you. People can say anything about you that they want, and they're entitled to do that. Sometimes it hurts. You have to develop a thick skin, but don't burn bridges because you never know where it's all going to go. So I want to tell you a little story that relates to this, how I got my very first bill passed. So my very first bill back in 1996, I had the brilliant idea to promote the wine industry, organic food, and farmers markets in Maryland. And I could not get this bill through the chair of the agriculture subcommittee. I provided all kinds of information to him. Neighboring states, Virginia and Pennsylvania, had many wineries. There were only 3 in Maryland then. Farmers markets were just kind of roadside stands, not very well developed. Organic food was coming. And all the information I gave him didn't mean anything till one day at the bill hearing came. And I'm telling my story, and he starts asking me questions. I'm a freshman. He's a sophisticated veteran, and I'm sweating. And then he gives me the opening that I took advantage of. He says, "So, Delegate Morhaim, you give me all this data, but these little chemicals actually do anything to anybody?" And I thought, yeah. I said, "I tell you what, Delegate, I'm going to bring just a couple of milligrams of something from the hospital tonight, and I will give it to you tomorrow, and you, me, and the committee will decide whether it has any effect." Now, I thought I would give him Versed. If you don't know what Versed is, it's a short-acting knockout drug that we use in the ER all the time. And but that's what flipped them. And I realized that some legislators like statistics, but others feel like, well, statisticians can lie. Does this actually affect real people? And other people, if you go to them with an anecdote, they'll say, well, that's an interesting anecdote and a compelling story, but we're not going to pass a bill because of one problem that one person has. So in your communication, after you've established that you're an activist and you vote, tell your story, use some data, but also use an illustrative aspect to it, so that they see whichever way they're thinking on that issue, that they're going to know about it. And be flexible and take half the loaf really means very rarely do any of us get all the things that we want in a bill. The legislature meets every year. Keep moving forward. So I'm going to tell you just a couple other stories from this list. Each one has a great story behind it. And I have a few minutes left, so I'm going to touch on a couple of them. Let me do blood donation. I was working an ER shift, and the hospital chaplain came up to me. This was after 9/11, and a busy shift, and he's tugging on my shirt sleeve. He says, "My son wants to talk to you." Well, his son is 16 years old, and okay, but all right, I'll talk to him, but not then. We'll talk some other time. And he came to, so I met this kid, and he said, "I went to donate blood, and I'm 16, and the age in Maryland is 18, and I couldn't donate blood. Although when I got my driver's license, I could check organ donation." And I thought, that's interesting. I mean, I'm working at a trauma center hospital, and I asked people to donate blood. I never thought about the age. So I called up the Maryland Red Cross, and they said it's 18. And we researched other states. In other states, it was 17 and 16. And so it was just arbitrary. Nobody thought about it. So I put in a bill to lower the age of blood donation to 17, and it passed. Now, this young man could have thought, oh, gee, this guy's a delegate and he's a doctor. What am I going to tell him that he doesn't know? Actually, I didn't know, and neither did the Maryland Red Cross. And so we now make blood donation at a lower age in Maryland, which does a better blood supply. The eye treatment bill was it was a very obscure bill that had to do with ophthalmologists wanting to get some medication that they could have that in their offices that could treat a bizarre and unusual retinal problem. They would actually inject it into the eye, but they had to get an exception to do that. The way I presented that bill is I had them come, and ophthalmologists are a very, cerebral kind of group, but I said, give me something that people won't forget. So he put up some pictures of, and everybody can see these on the screens in the hearing room, some eyes with that looked really horrible, and everybody gasped. And I gasped a little bit too, even though I took care of a lot of eye injuries in the ER. And people came up to me after and said, that eye bill, I want to vote for that eye bill. Not because they understood the issue, but because I hooked them emotionally with these eye things. And let me tell you, the last story is, I'm going to share is Gill Nets. So this is back to 1996 again. And this is a story of my ignorance on a bill, but this is how things happen. So this is before internet, so we get this piece of paper that says there's going to be 4 bills on gill nets. I was on the Environmental Matters Committee. That committee has been changed, but back then we dealt with all health policy, all environmental issues, and all utility issues. So Chesapeake Bay issues were there. And I notice it's not in our regular hearing room, it's in the joint hearing room, which is a big hearing room when there's large crowds. So I go there, and I go to the big hearing room, and it's packed with men and a lot of police. Now, there's always one state trooper in every hearing room because people get emotional, but in this case, there were quite a few there. And as I walk in, these men are looking at me, and they've got their guidebook to the General Assembly, plus I'm wearing a coat and tie. And they kind of push me in a corner and say, "How you voting on gill nets?" Well, heck, I don't even know what a gill net is. And the last thing a politician wants to do is say they don't know what they're talking about. Here's what the issue is. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. Gill nets have to do with the size of netting to catch fish in the Chesapeake Bay. And there are 2 parties that disagree on this, and they have for many, many, many years. On the one side are the watermen who want nets with small holes that catch a lot of fish because they get paid by pounds of fish at the dock. And on the other side are the sport fisher people who want the fish to swim through have big holes so the fish get bigger, and they can have their sport fishing tourist industry, and which serves a lot of restaurants and so forth around the area. For these people, this is the most important issue facing the Maryland General Assembly every year. It's how they put food on the table. It's how they feed their families. It's hard work. It's generational. They've been doing it often in families for decades. And they're looking at me. Here's the most important bill. Whatever you're passionate about, believe me, they're as or more passionate about it. And they're looking at me and thinking, this bozo doesn't know anything about the most important issue facing the Maryland General Assembly. And it was true. I didn't. Fortunately, some took pity on me and they said, Delegate Morhaim, would you like to learn a little bit more about this? And I said, that would be very nice. So now I'm going to compress what took me like a year or more to really learn. I did get taken to the Chesapeake Bay to fish. It was interesting and fun. It's not for me, but I appreciated it. And I learned all about gill nets. And I ended up, by the way, being with the sport fishermen. My district, Owings Mills, Pikesville, Randallstown, Timonium, it doesn't have any watermen in it. And I thought the bay was kind of overfished anyways. But what it taught me was that people were very patient with me. They taught me about all this stuff, and I learned about catch and bycatch and weaves and the life cycle of the crab and all this fascinating stuff that I really didn't know anything about. When we go in sometimes to talk about healthcare, whatever passionate issue we're about, you got to think of the legislator where they're at. Maybe they know a lot about this, maybe they know a little about it. But we're elected for 4 years. So anybody that walks away and says, this guy is an idiot, doesn't know anything about it, this legislator just is, ignorant, that may be true, but it's an opportunity for education. And if you combine the concept of you're a voter, you're in their district, you vote, preferably of their party, you're going to work with them. A lot of the bills that I got through were because citizens came to me, or there are things I thought of, and I worked with groups and coalitions to get them done. And don't burn any bridges. There's probably a few issues every legislator has to decide up front how they're going to vote: death penalty, LGBT rights, marriage equality, things like that, reproductive issues. But after that, we're a pretty flexible group. And so I'm proud that of my 139 bills in Maryland that I passed, all of them had bipartisan support. Often, almost all of them had bipartisan sponsors. And I was able to work with folks to get a lot done. I'm also really proud of the electronic recycling bill. All those electronic recycling things are bills that I created. Talk about half a loaf. I knew where we wanted to go with it. Started with the task force. The task force became a pilot program. The pilot program became more permanent. At first, we didn't accept printers. I knew printers were an issue. We didn't accept TVs, but I knew that was going to be an issue. But eventually we did, and it's kept millions of tons of waste. And it became a model bill for the nation, how we structured it in Maryland. So let me stop there and turn it over to Darrell, and we'll be happy to entertain any questions, comments, or personal attacks. And I hope this gave you a little insight into how it all works. It's a very dynamic and fluid situation. Let me say one other thing. 4-year cycle. The first year, if you get elected, it's a lot of people figuring out who they are and how to get to know each other, a lot of fresh new faces. 4th year of the 4-year cycle, people are thinking about re-election, those that are going to run again. And so years 2 and 3 are when a lot of more serious stuff gets done. Likewise, in the 90-day session, the first third is introductions and briefings, catching up. The second third has a lot of hearings, and the third one is 30 days is where a lot of the voting and decision making happens. After session, we all like to take a break, return to our families, homes, and jobs. Most of us do have jobs. So the session starts in January. The best time to start contacting legislators is right now, September, October, November. Once the session starts, it's almost too late. So you want to get to us so we can start understanding your issue and have the time to process it. Thanks very much. Let me turn it over to Darrell Carrington.
Thank you very much, Dr. Morhaim. That was a wonderful presentation. And I'll just segue right into basically, I consider this part of it lobbying 101. Everything that you wanted to know about lobbying was afraid to ask. So please, feel free to ask questions in the chat screen, and Luke will be monitoring it and filtering those things to us. So just real quick background on me, Darrell Carrington. I'm the managing director of a firm called Carrington and Associates. We've been around since 2006. We've been fortunate to work on a number of high-profile issues in Annapolis: marriage equality, trans rights, the death penalty repeal, raising the minimum wage, medical cannabis, and we've also represented sports teams. So we've been quite busy, and we are also very fortunate to have worked with every committee in Annapolis, which is sometimes a little rare for lobbies. Typically, they will have a particular area in which they specialize. So one of the things that I want to pick up on that Dr. Morhaim was speaking of, and that is that your expectations of your lawmakers. When people are first elected to office, they come with a certain passion, something, like a Barbara Mikulski, where she stopped a highway, but that doesn't mean she's going to know things about the Chesapeake Bay, or she's going to know things about sports leagues, or she's going to know things about taxes. So you do have to educate your lawmakers, and they will allow you to. One of the things that you have to also keep in mind is that your word is your bond. That is one thing that's really important in our world, and that is being honest. If you don't know the answer to something, be more than happy to get the information for the lawmaker, but never directly tell them something that you know otherwise to be untrue. And as far as regulated lobbyists such as myself, that would be actionable under our state ethics commission. So we are regulated by the Maryland State Ethics Commission, and believe it or not, the Maryland State Ethics Commission's laws are not just civic, it's actually under the criminal code, which is something that is very eye-opening for lobbyists. So you do see people in my profession and others that run afoul of the rules, which are very clear, and they're bright lines. And we're very fortunate to have a state ethics commission that you can call at any time, and they're more than happy to guide you through the process. So that's one thing. If any of you find yourself, you're going to be working in advocacy, working for a firm that's going to be doing lobbies in Annapolis, make sure that you always stay up to date with your state registrations, you stay up to date with your ethics training, because those are important parameters to keep you in line. And also, I believe the public deserves to know exactly who is talking to whom and who is having receptions for whom. It's a remarkable job that we get to do in Annapolis, me getting to work with lawmakers such as Dr. Morhaim and others, and they are actually the people entrusted with looking at our laws and deciding if we need to change them or add to them or repeal things and move forward. So when I mentioned that your word is your bond, you only have your reputation in Annapolis to build on, and that's a lawmaker or a lobby. So even as an advocate, even if you're just an advocate as a citizen, your word is going to be important, and lawmakers, as they get to know you, will find out what your reputation is. So always make sure that you are as honest and you are as prepared as possible. Dr. Morhaim said, making sure that you look at the State General Assembly website, every lawmaker has their bio, and personal connections really do matter. I started as a very small firm. We didn't have a lot of money, so we couldn't write a lot of checks. But one of the things that we did was a lot of door knocking. We went to a lot of parades with elected officials, and we marched with them and their families, and we actually got to know them, and we get to know them as people. And then you actually get to have those longer conversations that you don't get to have during the 90-day session in Annapolis, when bullets are flying overhead, so to speak, and excuse the terminology, but when everything is live and everyone is running around trying to get their bills done by all of the deadlines that are set up in Annapolis, that if you don't hit this date or the other date, then your bill goes to rules. And basically, rules is where your bills and your dreams go to die, unless it's something that's a legislative priority for leadership. Things that go into the rules committee usually do not come out of rules committee. So there's a lot of pressure and a lot of stress, and people are running around. So that's why it's really important to do the work outside of session, when lawmakers actually have time, when you can invite them to go fishing and spend the day with them and tell them about all the things, the reasons why this issue is so very important to us and why the other side has it wrong. But something else that Dr. Morhaim mentioned, and you have to know, and a very good friend of mine and a former legislator that served with Dr. Morhaim for a number of years, and that's Jim Hubbard, who used to always say to me, Anyone who comes to Annapolis expecting everything is going to be walking away with nothing. And that is a very, very true statement. And when Dr. Morhaim says you take the half a loaf, that means just that. You build on it, you get something done so that you can come back next year and build on it, or maybe through regulation. Maybe it's something that once a department has the authority to do, then working through the rulemaking process when they're actually writing what the regulations are and still working with the General Assembly, you may be able to get those things done. So I always say that you have a couple of bites at the apple after you get legislation on the books. You have the legislative session itself, and then you also have the regulatory process within the agencies and departments themselves. So those are things to keep in mind. It's not a zero-sum game. And it's really important not to burn bridges. It's really important not to make assumptions about people as well. Don't judge books by their covers. Actually take the time to get to know folks. I'll give you a great story. A person who you might not believe is a good friend of mine, because he is one of the most conservative members of the General Assembly, but Michael Huff. Michael Huff is a very conservative state senator from Western Maryland. He happens to be a very good friend of mine. I take it upon myself to go by every office in Annapolis and introduce myself to the staff, and if the members there as well, to introduce myself to them, especially if they're a new member, and ask them, and just as Dr. Morhaim was saying, it's like, oh, you went to Salisbury? I went to Salisbury. You play golf? I play golf. Whatever that connection is, and you sit down and you say, well, what's important to you? And I sat down with Michael and I said, I at the time I was doing work for the state's attorney's office. I was interested in reentry issues from a social justice point of view, but as a conservative, he was concerned about the money that we were wasting by violating someone who just had a dirty urine. Almost once you get out of prison, of course you're going to go and smoke some weed. It's almost, a guarantee. So why would we punish somebody for something we know they're going to do? That was a joke. And when we're doing these things on Zoom, you don't know if your joke fell flat or not. But nevertheless, he looked at it from one side and I was looking at it from the other side, but we were both looking at the same issue and trying to get to the same place. And that bill that he and I worked on together, I actually walked around and got co-sponsors. People were like, you're getting co-sponsors for a Republican's bill. I'm like, I'm neither Democrat or Republican, I'm a lobbyist here. And so that bill passed. I believe it passed with only 2 objections. So between the Senate and the House, that bill only had 2 people vote against it. And that was remarkable. And those are things that can be accomplished in Annapolis when people put aside their supposed differences or ideological differences, and they just sit down and talk to one another. And you will get to see that when you walk around Annapolis and you go to various places for lunch or dinner. You will see the same lawmakers you thought didn't like one another during the day sitting down having lunch or dinner together, and you're like, what? No, because this isn't Washington. I see that a lot of people in Maryland, they're just decent people and they actually do enjoy working with one another. So I see someone's asking about how bills, the actual process. Real quickly, the process can start very quickly. It can start before the legislative session even starts. We actually have a November 1 date that folks can what's called pre-file a bill. There are some questions as to the wisdom of pre-filing a bill, but you can pre-file. That means that you are going to be guaranteed a bill date and a bill hearing date. There's also another date during session, and there are several trigger dates that you have to either have your bill in so that you're guaranteed a bill hearing. There are certain dates that have to happen that your bill has to actually cross from one chamber to go across the other chamber to be guaranteed a hearing in the opposite chamber for your bill. So I don't want to spend a lot of time because I could really get into the weeds on the.
Well, let me jump in there, Darrell, if I can.
Please,
so as a person who actually gets to introduce the bills, what you end up doing is you call bill drafting. And I've had people in my office who've told me a story. I thought it was so good. I would pick up the phone, call bill drafting and say, I want a bill that does X, Y, and Z. Bill drafting, it's a confidential relationship between the state legislator and the bill drafter, but I could specify, I'd like Mr. Carrington, who happens to be an expert on this subject, to be able to work on the bill. And then they draft the bill. They put it into that formal bill structure. Now, as time went on, I got pretty good at being able to write bills. I certainly had some things I didn't do well in the legislature, but one thing we all have our strengths and weaknesses. I became very good at bill reading and bill drafting. And so people would often come to me with their bills and say, can you fix this language? Can you fill the text, fix the text of this? But that's how it actually gets started. A legislator calls up and there's attorneys and bill drafters, and they turn it into official language. Then you get a copy of the bill at some point. Then it's your job as a legislator, and you make political decisions. Do I want to get co-sponsors? Who do I want to get? And then there's all these dates that Darrell mentioned that you want to file. I want to say one other thing about the agreement disagreement issue. A lesson I learned in my first term when I was working on a bill that I really thought was going to pass that would limit access to tobacco for youngsters, for teens. And I was really passionate about it for obvious reasons. And at the last minute, the guy sitting next to me did a parliamentary maneuver and killed the bill in committee. If I had a knife, I would like to have plunged it into his thigh. I mean, he's literally sitting next to me, and it's like he's killing my kid, you know, that's what it felt like. However, 20 seconds later, the next bill comes up and we're allies, you know, and I had to let go of my animus, my hatred for him. If I could have sent out little lightning bolts from my eyes, I would have, but, you know, that's how it works. And it was a challenge for me personally to not carry that over. And I learned that over and over again, and, you know, learned that, and so we disagreed on a number of issues, but over the years, we worked on a lot of issues together. And in fact, that blood donation bill had because it lowered the age of consent, there was a tendency for it to get dragged into consent issues about abortion and reproductive access, but it was blood donation. Now, this guy happened to be an ex-Marine. We became friends, but he was very much on the other side of the reproductive rights issues than me. But I went to him and I said, look, can you just make sure that we don't get dragged into this consent issue? He said, put my name down as the first co-sponsor of the bill, and I'll tell them to stay out of this. And that was a big step towards being able to get that bill passed, because it could have got dragged into all kinds of other things that had nothing to do with that. So, Darrell, why don't you talk a little bit about how citizen lobbyists testify, how we sign up for testifying now?
Well, that's actually a process that had, while we were in a virtual world last year and we missed the opportunities of being in front of one another, it did, in my estimation, provide citizens a better opportunity to participate in the process. Typically, citizens are required to be here in Annapolis to submit their testimony between 10 and 12. Then they would have, and they have to also sign up to testify before 12 o'clock. And then, of course, then they wait until the hearing started at 1, and you don't know what the order of the bills may be. There could be 16 bills on that docket. So you could be here till 8:30, 9 o'clock in the evening testifying on the bill. And you usually get 2 minutes. Some committees is 3, but most committees have been going with 2 minutes for testimony. So you do not get a lot of time. And I happen to think this past year, in which people were able to electronically send in their testimony and also able to sign up to testify electronically, was better for citizen participation. Again, you do lose something with in person, you lose something with the reactions that you may be able to read from lawmakers as you're delivering your testimony. So there's this balance. I sincerely hope that we're not going to go back to the days where people have to, run to Annapolis to be able to submit their testimony before 12 o'clock. I hope that we're now in a world in which people will be able to send in that testimony electronically. But I would like to respond to a couple of the questions that are here, because someone asked something that's specific to a lobbyist, such as, with a complex process such as this, how do we measure success? Obviously, if I have a client and they're trying to push an issue and we are able to get that bill passed, that's a success. But oftentimes, and this is very much true, it is far easier to kill a bill in Annapolis than it is to get a bill passed. I have a million ways I can tell you how you can kill a bill, but getting a bill passed is really hard. The reason why I say it's easier to kill a bill because of the process itself is a very deliberate process in getting something from introduction into law. So the bill has to be introduced and has to be assigned to a committee. That committee conducts a hearing on it. They assign it to a subcommittee within that committee. That subcommittee then reviews the bill. If they find it favorable, then they refer it to the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole then has to find it favorable to send it to the floor. Then the floor has to take it up on its second reader, and then people can amend it, have questions back and forth. Then it goes to third reader in that particular chamber. It's not supposed to be amended any further. And then once that passes, it goes over to the next house. So either it goes to the Senate or goes to the House, depending upon what the originating chamber is. And then the bill goes through that process again. It has to be assigned, it gets introduced on their floor. It then has to get assigned to a committee in the opposite chamber's house. It has a hearing. Usually that hearing is going to be sponsor only because the bill has already been heard in one other chamber. Then that particular committee and the other opposite chamber then has to vote on that particular bill to move it to its floor, and then it would move to the floor on its second reader in the opposite chamber. And if they take it up, they can take up amendments up to the third reader on the opposite chamber. So you can see there's a lot of things that have to happen before they pass that bill. And then if there's any differences between the original chamber's bill and the opposite chamber's bill, that has to go into what's called a conference committee. 3 members are selected from each body, from each the House and the Senate, and then they go into what's called a conference committee to try to resolve the issues between the two bills. If they resolve the issue, then so be it, and it becomes law. If they don't, bill dies. And you know,
Can also
ahead,
bills can be put in what's called crossfile, where the identical bill is put in by a House member and a Senate member, and that sometimes can be very helpful, sometimes not. Those are all political decisions one has to make. Sponsors, somebody asked a question, what are sponsors and co-sponsors? Sponsors are the ones who are the first name on the bill, and they really end up carrying the load. Co-sponsors, their names are attached. They may or may not have anything to do with the bill, and sometimes we all have ended up co-sponsoring bills we really didn't end up liking because somebody put it in front of us and it sounded good. So you have to be really careful with that, but I don't put too much weight into co-sponsors beyond a certain amount. Chair people, there's a comment here. Chair people are pretty powerful. They kind of control a lot of the agenda, and subcommittee chairs, when I was a subcommittee chair, I got to control some of the agenda and work with our chair, but the more high profile issues that basically the speaker and the Senate president are going to decide whether they're going to happen or not. And it's tough. And the committee chairs are being pulled in all directions by all kinds of people, including other legislators, because we have to lobby each other. Besides citizens lobbying us, we got to lobby each other. So we're lobbying and being asked to support things. So it's quite a dynamic situation. I did want to say one other thing about testifying. It's good to testify from the heart. You know, tell your story. There's people who you've got their written testimony and then they read it. It's kind of hard to sit through a lot of that. And I will tell you, the organ donation bill in 2008, I revamped all the organ donation laws, which sparked the organ donation programs at Hopkins and University. Whatever I said was maybe helpful, but was really effective was people who came up who testified and who said, I lost a loved one, but they donated their organs. And then next to them were people who were alive because they'd received an organ donation. And in some cases, the person sitting next to them had the organ of the loved one who had been deceased. That was so emotional. I mean, it was, you could not listen to that and not be moved. And that was way more effective than all the data that I might have provided. And so that there were a lot of issues to deal with the bill. We worked through them, but when people saw folks speaking from their heart about how this had comforted them in the face of a loss or kept them alive when they thought they weren't going to be able to continue without a kidney or something, that was very moving and very effective testimony. So keep those things in mind as you go. Someone asked me about my life as a legislator and a doctor. For me, I'm an ER doctor, so I was a shift worker. I just went off shift and lost income after session was over. I took a little break and then went back and worked. But being an ER doctor is really what informed a lot of my politics, because so much of what I was seeing was social issues, and it kept informing me as to what the social issues were happening: drug addiction, homelessness, abuse issues, tobacco, all these things. And actually, it's part of the reason I got involved in politics, because so much of what I was seeing in the emergency room, I could see had a social antecedent. So why not try to take what I've learned, what I saw in the emergency room, and deal with it in the legislature to avoid some of those problems. And that's why I became very active in being really introducing and getting past the first major bill back in 1996 or 7 that was the first major drug treatment bill. Shifted the policies from all law enforcement to let's have some room for treatment in there for people with substance abuse and organ donation and end of life care. These were all things that I was dealing with clinically, and then trying to think of better ways that the legislative laws, the laws could change to service the public that I was taking care of.
And I guess I would add, I know that we're about to close out in terms of just what a lobbyist does and kind of some of the roles that we have. It's not just in terms of pushing legislation. We also do business development. So I have a client, for example, First Financial Mortgage. They started out with 3 employees and me as their lobbyist. And today, 6 years later, they're a $500 million company doing $45 million or more a month in sales. And that's because I handle their regulatory issues, plus I do marketing. So we wear a number of different hats for our individual clients. It's not always Annapolis based, but we're keeping the conversation back to Annapolis. Our success is not just measured in wins and losses, but it's also in terms of being able to educate lawmakers and take an issue that just got introduced and making sure that, let me just say this. Usually, unless it's something that's a major issue for the state that we're facing a crisis, a new issue does not get past the first year it's introduced, because there are so many questions. Whoever is introducing it, unless they have done a lot of homework in the in the off season beforehand, there's going to be questions on the people on the opposite side of whatever that bill is. What do they need? What are the problems that they see with it? What are the unintended consequences of what this legislation might do that the sponsor and the advocates didn't already think of? We used to have a chairman for our finance committee, Mac Middleton, who was the opinion that all new ideas should go to summer study. We should never introduce any new ideas as bills. And so sometimes it's a matter of it's an education campaign. And when you're working with a lobbyist, you may find this in your fields. You may have an organization that already have a lobbyist, and you'll see that they're on an education campaign for the past couple of years to educate 10 more lawmakers to our side and 10 more next year. And then we will actually have, I worked on marriage equality, and I worked on that bill it took us 6+ years. And that was literally our plan. I mean, every year it was building a little bit more, building a little bit more, building a little bit more. Did you want to add anything to that, Dan?
No, but I see Luke Jones asked a very pertinent question, which is about responsive to donors versus regular citizens and the role of money. Yes, money does have a big role in politics. I think it's too much. It's unfortunate. I would rather think of other ways to deal with it, but there's no doubt that campaigns cost money. And unless you're independently wealthy, you're going to have to raise it. But there are folks who don't have money, but as I wrote in my slides, if you walk in a parade, you put up a lawn sign, you host a coffee, you just send 10 postcards to 10 neighbors in your neighborhood, say, please vote for Dr. Dan or whatever it is, that's helpful too. I think we do need to rethink the whole money issue. It's much more of an issue at the federal level where they're constantly fundraising than at the state level, fortunately. But all our donations are on the Maryland Generally website, who gave you money and where it goes. But I found that, I tried to respond to everybody that I could, whether they were in my district or not. Like that 16-year-old with the blood donation, he didn't live in my district, but he had a good idea. And so I think people are responsive to good ideas, but voting election part is really important. There's going to be primary elections coming. Sure.
And it's just because Dan is a rarity, okay? Dan will respond to people outside of his district. And I wanted to say something because I know that technology is in a lot of use, and so we do email blasts and the like. That is not as effective as you think it may be. A lawmaker is going to respond faster. I think all lawmakers will respond faster to their own constituents than they are getting a random email blast from somebody from South Bend, Indiana, or from outside of their own district, even if they are in Maryland. So it's really important for that personal touch. And I almost say, don't be lazy. Don't think technology. I send out a tweet or I send out an email blast. While that may be great to do, the personal touch is still the most effective way, and having citizens within the same district of those members is the most important advocacy I think you're going to have.
Darrell's exactly right. Independent of money. And yes, so people who help me, yes, I do respond to them. It doesn't mean I'm always going to do what they want. But if there's a finite amount of time, I mean, you know, those are the people I will call back personally or whatever. Somebody says, what's the small step folks can take when the session is in progress? Testify, support an advocacy group. Yeah, all of those things. Support Chesapeake Physicians for Social Responsibility would be a real good thing, because that's a great organization. We have a great lobbyist. We have Luke Mayhew, who's great. A lot of key issues that are really important. CPSR does a good job. But even a small step makes a huge difference. You know, again, the 16-year-old who called me up, you know, and got me interested in this blood donation issue. That's how that started. A lot of things start, you know, the electronic recycling started because I found that our family closet was getting filled with old electronics, you know, and I was out in the community and I said, anybody have this problem? Am I the only one? Every hand went up. What are we going to do with this stuff? It's, you know, valuables and toxins and all kinds of things. I want thrown by the side of the roads or into rivers or being dumped on highways. So any step you take, believe me, at the state level, small steps go a long way. If you're courteous, you're patient, you communicate well, genuine letters, real communications go a long way. So it's not as difficult as it is trying to get through to DC or to the president of the United States or the governor. Your state legislators generally, not, you know, it doesn't take that many people to elect you. And so if you just say, I'm a voter, here's my issue, Mrs. Jones, my next door neighbor is the older lady, she's living alone, she could do with some home health. By the way, there's like 1,000 people in the area who are facing the same thing. And rather than put her in a nursing home, wouldn't it be better if she had some home health? That's the kind of story that we will respond to. Marriage equality, Darrell was way out on that one. And you know, what it took was people coming into the office and saying, we're a gay couple and we love each other and we want the same, you know, system that everybody else has. And unless you've had a lot of that kind of experience, you know, we saw the change that took place over time when people were willing to talk about those things, or people who have a kid with autism or substance abuse, or they have a issue with some other medical thing, you know, they're willing to come forward. It's very effective.
One other, I'm sorry again, interrupt. One other
Sure, go ahead.
thing I wanted to hit before we leave too is the staff. One of the things I take great pride in is I know just about everybody's chief of staff, secretary, legislative aide, and many times lobbyists and people like me will walk right past a secretary or, you know, or the chief of staff and think that they're nobody. And these are the people who have helped carry them. You know, usually the lawmaker, they've knocked on doors for them. They were the treasurer for their campaign. They do their yard signs. They put up their big signs. So make friends with the staff. Always treat them with dignity and respect, because they are the gatekeepers for those lawmakers.
And a lot of staff goes on to become state legislators.
Exactly.
And my first staff person, I only had 4 and one died, unfortunately, sadly, but in my old 24 years, which was a little unusual, but it was my campaign manager. And she got the job. And by the way, we don't have huge staffs. If you're a regular old delegate, you get a staff of one. It's not like you got an office filled with that. I would get I was on the faculty at the School of Public Health at Hopkins, and I had some grad students every year that would come in and pitch in. If you're committee chair, you get 2 or 3 people, but even the Speaker of the House only has 3 or 4 people working for her, the Senate President, 5 or 6 people. So the staff's really important. And they're certainly, you know, my staff, I would always go to them. Sometimes they sat in on meetings, and afterwards I would say, how'd that meeting go? What did I do well? What did I do wrong? Did I miss any points? How do we follow up? What's the best way? So we're all doing everything, answering the phone, doing the filing, but coordinating a lot. Thank you for mentioning that, Darrell.
My pleasure.
So,
were there any other questions?
The hour's getting late, so there are a couple of final comments, and thank you both. This was just tremendous, and it's being recorded, so it'll be available, I think, on our website. You'll be able to pick it up. I want to thank Luke Mayhew, who without him coordinating all this for us. We couldn't have done it. So he's just a tremendous part of Chesapeake PSR. And again, thank you to Dr. Dan and to lobbyist Darrell. You both are really important parts of CPSR, and you've put this on for the public. I want to thank Janine Feaster, who's from MedChi, the Maryland Medical Association. There are some physicians here, and MedChi helped us put the word out, but some of us on Chesapeake PSR are also on the legislative committee of the Medical Association. It gives us another way to advocate for good policy. And I think it's an example of all of us wear more than one hat. And so you can use different organizations that you're in to help, lobby and for good policy. And of course, the bigger your group, the more clout you have. I want to say it's really important that you're, as physicians, but everywhere, we try to be evidence-based. So you want to give personal stories, but you also want to give evidence and make sure your evidence is honest. It's really important. I want to also say that medical students and other students and young people are very important. I've seen delegates and senators with their cell phones, during the hearings, but a younger person comes in to speak, to give testimony, and they look up from their cell phones. So there's just, I think younger people have power they don't realize. Don't read your testimony, make your written testimony can be longer, but the oral testimony is something different. Do some of the highlights of what you've written, but that's really, really important. I hope that, I don't know, Luke, will you be able to put the link to this survey that Dr. Bartlett from Chesapeake PSR is helping promote, and you can put Chesapeake PSR in it if you want, so that environmentalists are trying to put together what legislation is most important to most people. So if that can be in the chat, you can look at that and copy it and fill it out. Trying to think of other things that we haven't mentioned, but you really can make a difference on the local level or the state level. And I think people don't realize that. And the first time you testify, you may really be nervous, but after a few times you realize you can do this thing. And it's very a good feeling, and it's part of being really a good citizen. We don't get paid like the big corporations, but we can still have a voice. And I think it's in a big impression to delegates and senators when you're coming there to speak on behalf of something, and you're not being, it's not something that you're going to personally make money from, but it's something that you care about. So with that, I want to again thank everyone who's been part of this, our speakers, our organizer, and all the people who've asked some really great questions. And if we can, maybe we can get some answers to people from questions if we weren't able to do it right here and now. So thank you all, and be well and be active.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.